What if the oldest wisdom in philosophy isn't a library of certainties, but a habit? A stubborn practice of asking better questions until the ground shifts beneath your assumptions? Socrates didn't write the rules of the world. He taught a way to live inside the messy middle of them. And that decision to doubt, to probe, to keep asking reframed what counting as knowledge even means. In a world that likes neat answers, Socrates handed us a different currency, questions that never settle. He walked the streets of Athens with a paradox stitched into his posture, a question ready to be spoken before the answer could be named. What is virtue? He would ask. What is wisdom? He kept turning the mirror toward his fellow citizens until they could see not only what they believed, but why they believed it, and whether their beliefs still held when faced with a stubborn counterexample. Context matters here. Socrates lived in a city at the edge of empire, where power whispered in the agora and certainty wore the mask of piety. The bite-sized dogmas of his day claimed universal truth, and yet something inside him resisted the easy narrative. He was opposed to knowledge. He was allergic to the illusion that knowledge could arrive fully formed, intact, and free of consequence. If you want to understand why philosophy shifted from a cosmos-first project to a people-first practice, you trace that allergy to the moment Socrates asked a question you couldn't answer and walked away, with more questions than you started with. The method matters more than the man. Socrates didn't wield a hammer to smash ideas. He used a thread, a technique of Elenchus. The cross-examining dialogue that exposes the gaps between what we say and what we actually know. He would pursue a definition, then show how it collapses under its own test. Not to humiliate, but to illuminate. The goal wasn't victory. It was clarity so sharp it could pierce the inertia of illusion. If you've ever argued online and felt the air crackle with stubbornness, you're feeling the same pull Socrates faced. The pull toward truth that refuses to bow to comfort. SFX, click 0. 5 Socrates didn't claim to know the good in a definitive, final way. He claimed to know one thing with absolute certainty, that he did not know. This is not self-doubt masquerading as humility. It's a political act in a world hungry for certainties to plaster over fear and power. By acknowledging ignorance, he made room for inquiry to breathe. A community could test itself, question its traditions, and grow into something more resilient than dogma could ever be. In that small stance, a revolution begins. Thinking becomes a public act, not a private victory. The transformation is not a crash course in ethics alone. Socrates reoriented philosophy from metaphysical speculations about the nature of reality to the practical cultivation of character. The unexamined life, he said, is not merely uninteresting. It is a life that cannot be judged worthy of being lived well. If the grand project of philosophy is to guide living, Socrates insisted that the first discipline is self-scrutiny. What kind of person are you becoming as you accumulate facts? How do your beliefs shape your action? These questions turn philosophy into something usable, something that can steer a person through fear, temptation, and the gray zones where right and wrong blur. As his ideas spread beyond Athens, they did not erase contradiction. They invited it. The philosophers who followed him learned to argue not to annihilate an opponent, but to test ideas in the public square, to invite dissent as fuel for progress. The truth, they argued, is not a solitary trophy, but a shared achievement earned through patient dialogue, through the discipline of listening as much as speaking. That stance, honoring the other's capacity to surprise you, becomes the seed of later scientific method. Hypotheses proposed, experiments run, biases confronted, and knowledge refined in the same conversational arena where here is the twist that often goes unspoken. Socrates did not leave us a single doctrine to defend. He left us a practice. He handed philosophy a life like a craft, something you do with daily attention rather than a confession you recite about once a week. This is why his wisdom persists in classrooms, courts, laboratories, and coffeehouse debates. The method is portable. It travels across cultures, languages, and time because it demands integrity in the stance toward uncertainty. The power of his transformation is that it converts philosophy from a gallery of ideas into a workshop for living. Consider how our modern world uses questions. In science, hypotheses arise to be tested, not to be worshipped. In politics, principles must prove themselves under pressure rather than resting on the authority of tradition. In daily life, we are invited to dismantle the easy stories we tell about ourselves when the truth would serve us. Socrates understood that the road to wisdom is not a straight line. It is a labyrinth of doubts that keep showing you new doors. Each door invites more responsibility, to follow the argument wherever it leads, to revise your map when it no longer matches the terrain, to admit that sometimes wisdom is simply the courage to change your mind. This is where philosophy becomes humane. Socrates' wisdom teaches humility not as a resignation, but as a stance that enlarges our capacity to act well. If knowledge is a compass, humility is the gravity that keeps us from flying off the map into certainty's illusion. The Elenchus becomes not a weapon, but a tutor, guiding us to examine the origins of our beliefs, to test them under the pressure of contradictory evidence, and to emerge with a more robust sense of what we owe to ourselves and to others. In a sense, Socrates makes philosophy ethical first and intellectual second, because without moral clarity, clever arguments can weaponize ambiguity rather than illuminate it. The enduring impact is visible in the way we structure inquiry today. When a scientist formulates a question, when a journalist challenges a claim, when a student argues for a position while exposing its weak spots, they echo Socratic practice. The shift is not to abandon certainty, but to demand its resilience. A certainty that survives rigorous questioning, not a certainty that dissolves when faced with a tough question. The transformation is the birth of critical thinking as a daily discipline and attitude of persistent question, a courtesy toward contradiction, a readiness to revise in light of better reasons. That, more than any single theorem, is Socrates' legacy. Yet we must not romanticize him as a relic of the past. Socrates still challenges us to live with integrity when it costs us something: status, comfort, or the easy applause of certainty. He reminds us that wisdom is less a crown than a practice, a stubborn, daily willingness to re-examine what we hold most dear. The first step is not a grand deduction. It is a quiet stance of listening. The next is a stubborn clarity, to pursue what is true even when the truth unsettles our favorite stories about ourselves. That is the art of living with wisdom in a world that often prizes speed over reflection, certainty over conversation, and victory over understanding. So what changed, really, when Socrates walked the streets and asked tough questions? Philosophy moved out from the temple and into the streetlight and the dinner table. It learned to tolerate not knowing as a precondition for knowing. It learned to turn conflict into clarity rather than retreat into cages of agreement. And it learned that being wise is not about having every answer, but about being willing to revise your beliefs in the face of better reasons. In that humility, a path opens, not toward closure, but toward ongoing, meaningful inquiry. The wisdom Socrates offered is not a distant doctrine. It is a practical invitation to live curiously, ethically, and responsibly in a world that refuses to stand still. If you carry one takeaway from his life, let it be this: questioning is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. Not every question needs an immediate answer. Some are scaffolds for the next ascent. In Socrates' light, philosophy becomes a humane project of becoming wiser together, rather than a solitary ascent to a private peak. The true transformation only in what we discover about the world, but in how we choose to conduct ourselves while seeking it. Wisdom, then, is less a destination and more a discipline. The patient, courageous practice of asking, listening, testing, and choosing with care. That is the most lasting imprint Socrates left on philosophy and on us. As you move through your own inquiries, carry this paradox. The more you seek to know, the more you become able to live well. The wisdom of Socrates isn't a monument guarding a single truth. It's a doorway that remains open as long as questions endure. And in an age hungry for certainty, that doorway may be the most radical act of all. To keep asking, to stay teachable, and to keep choosing truth over comfort, even when the choice is hard. Open questions linger at the edge of every stance you take. Are you prepared to test your beliefs with the same rigor Socrates used in the Agora? Are you willing to let your certainty suffer gentle erosion under the weight of better reasons? If the answer is yes, then you've already begun to inhabit his wisdom. A wisdom not of perfect answers, but of fearless questions, a wisdom that transformed philosophy by turning it from a monument into a lived practice. A practice that keeps guiding us toward greater clarity, courage, and care. What will you ask next? And what will you learn about yourself in the asking? If we let questions lead us, we may find that wisdom is a practice that grows stronger the more we share it, the more we test it, the more we endure the honest uncertainty that makes us human. That, in the end, is Socrates' gift, not a final answer, but a method for living well